don't always go to plan in the world of business. Unforeseen dilemmas and problems can arise, and often business owners aren't prepared and don't know where to turn when the going gets tough. Crisis management in business can cover a multitude of challenges, from negative publicity, high insurance claims against the business and property damage, to financial difficulty. It can be very stressful if you don't know where to turn. Welcome to Good Business. I'm Kathy Davis, and on the season finale of the show, we look at business crisis management. Joining me on the panel, we have our regular guest, Associate Professor Margie Hume, who is a business and marketing expert. Peter Riekers from Crisis Ready joins us to discuss good and bad reputations and how small and large business might handle crises. Chris Martin from KDM Financial explores how to protect your business. And Dr. Aidan Burke, Director of Corporate Communication at USQ and Public Relations expert, is here to talk about the key points of crisis communication. Firstly, Margie, can you give us an insight into crisis management in business?
I guess there's a couple of things with crisis management. The first thing is that inevitably how long you've been in business, you're going to experience some form of crisis. The second thing is it comes in different shapes and forms. So it could be something that's financially related, or it could be a product-related failure, or it could be as a result of a natural disaster. So you need to understand that a crisis comes in different shapes and forms, so you need to know how to recognise it. And by recognising it, you can actually do something about it. One of the other key issues about crisis management is to understand that there's different stakeholders that may be involved. So there's people as part of the immediate crisis, which may be yourself, running a small business and your employees, but also a whole gamut of stakeholders that are surrounding your business, like your suppliers. If you go out of business, you're not buying their supplies, so that crisis is going to impact them as well. And then it's very important to plan for the crisis. So if it's a financial crisis, recognise that you need to seek some financial advice, that corporate communications and experts in corporate communications can help you with managing your message and how to get the fact that you've had a crisis out there, but also to plan and be ready for the fact that it is perfectly normal and natural in your business at some point to experience a crisis. And if you buffer yourself by being prepared, you can actually react more appropriately.
What happens to most businesses when they begin to struggle with the types of crises that I've mentioned?
Well, I guess, you know, for wanting of a cruder term, they tend to start circling the drain. Because they throw more money at a problem, in particular a financial problem, they'll tend to overcommit and escalate, and they often don't recognise, so they start spiralling. If they were ready and prepared, they may actually have some strategies in place to help them.
Thanks, Margie. Peter, would you share how your company handles other business crises?
Well, as our name suggests, and as Shakespeare said, the readiness is all. So our focus is on getting a business ready for a crisis. So we do that through developing crisis plans, putting them through training, and also a lot of simulations. We like to say that a plan that hasn't been put through a simulation is not a plan, it's just a folder sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Thanks, Peter. Chris, what are the most common problems that you have that clients come to you with?
The typical problems we see are clients coming to us and they're not too sure in terms of how their business and also their family would actually end up in terms of position. If in the event of, say, a particular health event or even death of themselves actually was to occur. So we look at doing things such as, say, a succession or estate plan to try and solve those issues.
And Aidan, why is positive communication a must when dealing with crisis management?
I think, as other panellists here today said, I think what you're dealing with is reputation with the organisation, and in many instances what you're trying to do is not only salvage that reputation or that positive attitude and perceptions that stakeholders have about your organisation, but you also need to move forward. And at the end of the day, while the crisis is happening, at some stage it's going to finish, and you still have to be managed through that situation. You still need to be solvent, if you like, to move forward. And I think crisis communication works at several levels. One, as Maggie said before, you have various stakeholder groups, but also communication is also important to your employees as well. And I think, well, we'll probably talk about that a little later, but I think employees are as important as any other external stakeholder group as well.
Thanks very much, Aidan. After the break, Peter Riekers from Crisis Ready looks at the way crises affect small business compared with large business. Welcome back. Aidan Burke is the Director of Corporate Communication for the University of Southern Queensland. He has a wealth of experience in public relations. Aidan, what role does public relations play in a crisis situation?
I guess if you look at what a crisis is, I guess to any organisation it's probably in something that's catastrophic, that's impacting on the organisation. But probably you step back from that from a public relations perspective, and there are various things that actually often lead up to a crisis. And from a public relations perspective, you're often dealing with issues management. Issues management can happen sort of years before basically a crisis actually occurs. What you're looking at particularly in issues management are those sorts of things, if you like, in the environment that might have measurable impact. And when I say measurable impact on the organisation, what might impact on the reputation of the organisation? What might impact on the management of the organisation over a period of time? So while issues can actually be buoying along in the environment, I guess, for some time, a crisis can often occur from left of field. It can occur, as Maggie said before, something catastrophic that all of a sudden hits an organisation. But in many instances, a lot of organisations put probably 20% or 80% of their effort into 20% of what might go wrong. But actually sitting behind that is 80% of issues that actually need some form of public relations and communication and marketing strategies that sit behind that. So a crisis can often occur, but if we actually get ourselves absolutely involved in the crisis and we don't actually look at what actually was leading up to the crisis, we can actually be fairly myopic, I guess, about what it is from an organisation's perspective.
So in terms of a definition, what is a crisis?
Well, from a public relations perspective, and it may differ from other people who are here on the panel, but as I said, it's something that's catastrophic, something that actually impacts the reputation of the organisation. I think everyone here on the panel today would probably agree that reputation is probably the primary focus in any crisis type situation.
Public relations professionals often come under attack for being spin doctors. Is there any foundation to that term?
Look, I think probably having a PhD, I'm probably the ultimate spin doctor. But no, I think if we understand what the term is, if I took this pen, I guess, and if I pointed the front of the pen to the negative perceptions that people have during a crisis towards an organisation, what public relations is trying to do is actually turn that perception or that arrow away from the negative to the positive. That's where they actually get the term spin. So it goes from the negative attitudes to the positive attitudes. What public relations is attempting to do is obviously the message is important. What we're hoping to do is actually educate people during times of a crisis. In many situations, communication is null and void. Organisations tend to bury their head in the sand, often bury their head in the sand and don't want to sort of comment to people. So rumour, innuendo, gossip is quite large, I guess. What public relations is trying to do is tailor the message to each of the target publics, as Maggie said here before, looking at what are the needs of those various target publics, what are their information needs from the organisation. So what the organisation should be attempting to do in managing the situation is providing information that educates, providing information that actually provides some form of peace of mind to the public out there, so they know that what the crisis is, what you are trying to do in order to remedy the situation, how it might affect them as individuals, and what are you going to do to fix up and how you're going to move forward. They're sort of the main things that organisations need to take on board in any crisis type situation. So you're using corporate communication. Corporate communication can be in two areas. There's the sort of the journalistic side of things, as we heard here before, about the importance of the message. But more importantly, it's also about strategic communication as well. Strategic communication as in, what are the issues that actually led up to that sort of situation? In many instances, if you are dealing with reputation type things, and reputation is everything to every organisation, because they just won't trade without a reputation. It doesn't matter how much advertising that you do. If you haven't got a good reputation, people will seldom tend to come along and support that organisation. But what you're attempting to do from a public relations perspective is actually make sure that you have enough information, enough support, corporate support, among your target publics leading up to if a crisis occurs, So if an organisation finds itself in the unenviable situation of a crisis, it's actually built up a bank, if you like, of goodwill.
Yeah.
So it actually draws on that goodwill from each of its target publics, and people are quite supportive of organisations. If you've actually brought up that goodwill and drawn down on it, they're more likely to forgive and forget, and the organisation moves
Thanks,
forward.
Aidan. Thank you so much for your time and talking over these issues. No one can be sure when a crisis will strike a business. In crisis situations, turning to someone with experience and solutions can be a deciding factor as to whether your business retains its reputation in a crisis. Crisis Ready offers a unique disaster training simulation exercise, a 3-day course on crisis management to develop coping techniques and educated responses for those undertaking the training. Peter, what is the most common form of crisis your clients want to prepare for?
I couldn't give you the most common. I mean, crises are as diverse as business are. So anything from the size of business can affect the type of industry, whether your service, product related. There are just too many to possibly list. It could be anything from a safety related workplace incident that gets out of hand, a failure of management to be listening to worker concerns can suddenly explode into something much nastier than it would have been had they been on top of it. It could be product related, product recalls, particularly around food, those sorts of things can be out there. And of course, as was mentioned before, natural disasters. I think many of the businesses around, say, the Rocklea area, I think were caught unawares that they were still in a flood zone back in the 2011 floods. So all sorts of things can affect a business, and the diversity of crises is huge.
What would you class as a crisis as opposed to a minor issue?
Well, as Aidan was just saying, I mean, issue management is probably 90% of the game. What we use as our guiding rule is that a crisis has got two aspects. One is a time sensitivity. If it can wait till Monday, then it's not a crisis. It's still an issue. So if you can't wait any longer, if we've got to make a decision right now, that's probably our first thing. The other one is outrage, and this goes to the reputation damage that Aidan was talking about. So if you've got some sort of pocket of outrage somewhere, add into that a time sensitivity where you have to deal with it right now, then you've got a crisis. And that's the definition we work to.
What kinds of crisis do you encounter in your line of work?
Look, it depends on the businesses we're dealing with at the time. It could be anything from construction, infrastructure, rail, road, water supply, electricity supply, huge variation of what it could be. Childcare, anything involving children, there's always going to be outrage there. You think about those sorts of factors. What are the likely triggers of outrage? And then you can start to work back from there. And that's what businesses should go through when they're getting ready for crisis, is think about, okay, how could we cause outrage, or how could we find ourselves involved in it? If we think about the BP oil spill in the Mexico Gulf, that wasn't BP's fault, but it got branded as BP's because that outrage was directed at them, and so they had to take ownership of it. So you've got to think about where the outrage is likely to come from, and then think about how you can manage that. If you can get rid of the outrage, then you're just back to incident management, and that's usually pretty easy.
Do you avoid working with businesses who come to you when they're actually facing a crisis?
2 o'clock on a Sunday morning is when you usually get the call. And well, it's either two things. It's either 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning or 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon when you've just had your first drink and you think you can relax for the weekend. Look, if a company cold calls me at that time of day, I'm unlikely to want to take their work on because they won't have gone through the readiness work that's so important. They're going to be so well prepared. And I think, to be unfair, let's pick on BP. I think that's, they were caught unawares by how the reputation damage was coming along. And therefore, if they'd given me that call, I might have hesitated because of their budget, but if they'd given me that call, I would have been reluctant because they didn't have a plan in place. They didn't know how they were going to handle it.
How do business crises differ between small companies and large corporations?
Aidan alluded to this before. I think the main thing is the amount of stakeholders and the type of stakeholders you're dealing with. Let's say you're a small local fish shop and you have a problem there. The people that are going to be concerned about that are the immediate audience, the people in your local area who might have bought some bad fish that's causing some sort of illness. Whereas if you're a listed company, then obviously your shareholders are a completely different audience again, and their perspective on it is quite different to those who are actually affected. I mean, they're thinking about the cash in their wallet, whereas people out there are affected by, for example, the safety recall. So it's mainly the stakeholders, and therefore how you communicate to those different stakeholders, the different audiences.
Thank you, Peter. After the break, we discuss how to protect your business from crisis with Chris Martin from KDM Financial. Welcome back to Good Business. A financial crisis is one of the most common to affect businesses, small and large. Chris Martin from KDM Financial and Estate Planning is here to explain solutions for a financial crisis as well as how to avoid them. Chris, what are some of the major issues that you see in regard to businesses struggling with financial crises?
The major issues or the major crises that we come across is when, say, you have one of the key people within the business or even one of the major shareholders or directors themselves, unfortunately, say, die or have a major health issue which results in not being able to work. As a result of that, often then businesses face situations where they need to, say, pay down debt, where income to the actual company itself drops significantly as well. And so we look at then ways in which we can try and avoid those situations, such as, say, succession plans, estate plans, buy-sell agreements and so on.
So once again, it's a case of being prepared, being ready for such an eventuality.
Spot on, spot on. Usually when the clients, if the event has actually occurred, hopefully we've already set everything up for them. We do handle certain claims on that side of things if they haven't already set up those particular agreements, but usually it's a case of that we already have those in place. And then it's a case of sorting out, well, how much needs to go to the estate, and then what the remaining shareholders or directors or key people do now that they've suffered that particular crisis.
That would make things so much easier and for all involved in the case when people are mourning to have a plan that they can kick into action. Spot on.
Not only that, but it's also then a case of the estate themselves or the family actually know how much they will receive in the event of, say, the director actually passing away. And then also the surviving or the remaining directors know that, okay, that the actual buyout has been funded through an insurer, but then also that there's other factors in there such as, say, pre-agreed purchase price of that particular succession plan, meaning that then that there's no arguing around actually how much they need to be paid out for their share in the company.
Does KDM deal only with financial crises?
No, we do deal in, I suppose, the more planning side of it in terms of, well, okay, then if that particular crisis was to happen, how are we going to actually come out of it with the business still surviving and still running successfully? How are we going to avoid the banks coming back with differing terms in terms of paying out debt and so on? So we do look after a bit more than just the financial, yeah.
With finance and estate planning, do you focus on just the business side of things or are personal situations taken into account as well?
Certainly personal situations as well. The big thing that we find with business owners is that most of their actual, their two biggest things in their life obviously are always their family and their business. So because both of them go hand in hand with the director themselves, well, so then should any estate or succession plan. I often have, with all my clients, is we make sure that all their spouse as well is actually insured in terms of if then that particular crisis at home was to happen, well, how are we going to lessen the financial effect on both the home life and the business itself.
Do you think there are any crises that can't be prepared for, such as a sudden economic depression or unexpected stock market crash?
Personally, I don't think. Yeah. I think you can fairly much, especially when we're talking on the financial side of things, negate a lot of those possible crises, mainly through taking on the attitude of course, making hay while the sun shines. Make sure that when things are going well, you invest in, say, your actual infrastructure, your equipment, invest in your staff as well. education's always, I always feel, the best investment you can make. And that should not only be taken on in terms of the directors or the shareholders, but also that key staff. Hopefully then meaning that when times do go into a bit of a lull there, at least we can fall back on, say, the knowledge that we've purchased more efficient machinery, say, in the years gone by, and as a result we can now get through those leaner times quicker or better.
Thank you very much, Chris. You've given us some interesting and thought-provoking information. Aidan, what's the most important factor in handling public relations during a major business crisis?
Don't panic. Don't panic. I think what you need to have, and it depends on the size of the organisation, but listening to everyone here today, I think planning is the number one focus that any organisation needs to take on board. It doesn't matter if you're a two-person show or it's a large organisation, but planning is the ultimate thing. Sit down and run through scenarios, I guess. Yeah. What if type situations? What if X occurred? What if Y occurred? How would I handle this? Would I want to see my name or my organisation in the media? How would I handle that sort of situation as well? There's the sort of questions that you need to ask. And if that means bringing in people to help you to advise on what you should do during a crisis, not only to advise but also how to manage that crisis, so you actually have key points that you can actually work through, so you're not sort of running around like a headless chook, I guess, that you actually do have direction, you do have management. This is what people want to see from an organisation. If they can see the managing director or senior management, that they're credible, that they actually have direction, that they're in charge, it gives them a sense of security, it gives them a sense of purpose, and it gives them a sense that, hey, this business is in control. It is something that's unfortunately hit this organisation, but we can see that there's a way out. So from a public relations perspective, planning is the ultimate key, keeping people informed, being visible, and most importantly, being credible.
How does positive communication assist businesses struggling with a crisis?
Well, I guess what you're trying to do is leading up to the crisis type situation, as I said earlier, you're trying to build a bank of goodwill. And that drawdown effect that you're having, once you've established goodwill within your organisation among your key publics, and they can be external publics as well as your employees, because employees they're concerned about the organisation, they're concerned about what it is, how it's going to affect them personally, do they have a job, those sorts of things. More importantly, employees who actually might go out and talk to others over barbecues and so on like that, so that old adage, you know, we'll tell one person one bad thing and 10 others will know very quickly. So your key stakeholder groups are important. So from a public relations perspective, or communications perspective, you're trying to build up that positive awareness. You're trying to maintain corporate identity during and after the crisis. So indeed what you're trying to do is make sure that you have sustainability, that old word that we keep using the whole time. But sustainability is important. How am I going to move forward by building up that bank of goodwill and making sure that I'm maintaining support from those key publics either before the crisis occurs, during the crisis, and then soon after.
Thanks very much, Aidan. Margie, what do you believe are key issues for businesses when managing a crisis?
I think Aidan and I agree on so many things. Probably just taking a step back for me, I'm a big believer in the pre-planning process, and across all facets of your organisation, no different than doing a marketing plan, doing a strategic plan, you actually do your crisis plan. And you go through the key, strategic business units or areas of your business, your IT, your marketing, your products and services, and you identify what could happen. And then you do your if-then-else scenarios. So if that happened, how would we handle it? If that happened, how would we handle it? On top of that, from a more strategic and corporate level, basic crisis management. What do we do in a crisis? If we have a fire in a building, we know the warden puts on the hat, the bell goes off, we all, assemble in a particular part of the building. And so you need to know the same thing in a crisis. If it occurs, what do you kick into process? But I think it was raised before, very early in the session, issues management. Pre-plan, know the issues, plan for them, and when the crisis hits, the outcome won't be so severe.
Thanks, Margie. Briefly, Peter, what would you summarise as the most important aspect of preventing business crisis?
And this won't come as any surprise. Get ready.
That's very brief. Thank you very much. And
Look, and it's not hard to do. It really isn't hard to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, think about plans, think about the situations you're likely to face, and then get ready for them.
Yep, thank you. And Chris, what are the key points of finances in regards to crisis management?
Well, if you're going to take on debt, then make sure you cover that debt in terms of insuring that debt if a crisis was to occur.
Aidan, can you give us your final perspective?
Plan for the worst and hope for the best.
And Margie, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm going with the Scouts, be prepared.
Weathering a crisis can be difficult for any business, but hopefully these discussion points have provided information about prevention methods and coping strategies. Thank you to studio guests Margie Hume, Peter Riekers, Chris Martin and Adrian Burke for their expansive discussion and information on crisis management. Thank you for watching the Good Business season finale. For previous episodes and more information on the show, go to www.goodbusinesstv.com.au. I'm Kathy Davis, and thank you for watching Good Business.